Cloud. All right. Cool. Hey everybody. Today we have Do from Terra. I'm super excited because for me, Terra has been one of the most underrated projects in the crypto space, especially in the Western part of crypto space. I don't think people on crypto Twitter don't really talk about it until maybe very recently. But I'm super excited to have Do with us today. I guess let's start with just a quick introduction, your background, and how you started Terra.
Yeah. So hey guys, I'm Do from Terra. I guess for me, so I used to be a software engineer at Microsoft for a little while after graduating college, and then I was working at a mesh networking startup. So we built ways for users to connect to the internet without having direct access to Wi-Fi or LTE. So we created it was sort of a full stack solution, but mainly we created a software SDK for user devices to connect to each other via Wi-Fi direct to Bluetooth. So the idea was that over multiple hops over different users, like in a crowded venue, like an amusement park or like a shopping mall or like an airport, like you'd be able to connect to internet even if there wasn't like an access point or like phone connectivity around. And then while I was doing that, I got randomly connected, invited to this Facebook chat room by one of my college friends, and then it had like 8 people at the time, and they were all talking about really excitedly about things like Ethereum and like Bitcoin and some of the newer projects that were coming out. So in the beginning, I thought it was mainly spam.
When was that?
This is like end of 2016. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was kind of that was pretty exciting. But what I started to notice is that the headcount in that room started to grow really quickly, and then I started to see friends of mine that I respect and have interesting conversations with join as well, and then them talking. So I was like, I gotta check out what this Ethereum thing is, and then I started studying up on things, and then it got really interesting. So I just started spending a lot of time like reading up on white papers, like going to meetups, and yeah, I did that for a while until towards the end of 2017, I decided to take the leap and jump into the industry full time. Yeah.
So was that when you started building Terra?
Yeah. So like officially, I think when we first raised the round and started hiring people, it was around maybe February of 2018. But towards the end of 2017, I like very randomly ended up meeting my co-founder Daniel Shin. So what was interesting is for Daniel, he was one of the first people that brought e-commerce to South Korea in 2010. He founded a sort of a e-commerce portal with around with more than 10 million monthly active users and about $4 billion in annualized transaction volume, which roughly puts it in context of around the 3rd or the 4th largest e-commerce company in the country. So I randomly ended up meeting him at like a drinking session, and then he was given that it was sort of like the peak of the bull market, he was thinking about whether he should buy this cryptocurrency Qiao.
Oh.
And I thought that was pretty hilarious because back in the day, like even very large altcoins like Qiao didn't really have proper websites. Like their tagline was the best of both Bitcoin and Ethereum, and that was absolutely hilarious to me. And then I pointed out, and I think like back then Qiao was like maybe $4 billion, either just circulating or fully diluted. I don't know, but I was like, and then for some reason the website didn't resize properly, so I pulled out my laptop and then showed him the website and said, "Is this thing worth $4 billion?" And then that just sort of led to an interesting conversation about like what an actual useful cryptocurrency should be. And then, yeah, and that's sort of how we got started.
So what do you think a useful cryptocurrency should be like?
Well, I mean, back then I used to think, well, you know, like there's just only a couple of use cases. Like you got to do what other fintech companies are doing. Obviously, I think my views on the subject have become a lot more nuanced. There's lots of different types of use cases of cryptocurrency that make sense, but I think right now, sort of the usefulness is sort of skewed towards speculation. So if you hold this, if you essentially like a lot of the projects these days essentially boil down to put something into a pool, which is going to give you some derivative or rights to that pool, and then you put it into a different pool, and then you put that into a different pool.
Yeah.
And then each step of the way it gives you something, right? So
yeah.
Whereas that's an interesting use case. I think there should be ways to sort of extend outside of that sort of yield farming chain.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are things that particularly interest me.
Okay. I mean, I'm personally very interested in things that are not speculative, because most things, to your point, are speculative in crypto. And that brings us to the topic of Terra, because my impression was that Terra is actually used for something non-speculative, right? I guess one of the first products is a stablecoin, which people use for actually day-to-day payment. Maybe tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess the way that I thought about it is it's interesting to approach the go-to-market in a couple of different strategies, but we felt like number one was building a payments network. And the reason for that is, even if, let's say, you were to build something like Brave browser, right? If you don't have, you know, payment endpoints by which the BAT token could be used, then in that case, it's not very useful, right? Because like you just need to clear KYC and then you know, go to an exchange to sell these tokens, which is essentially just like a periodic token dump for people that are motivated enough to clear KYC. But well, essentially, I felt like for any sort of crypto network, you needed a way where you know, the tokens could be circulated and redeemed for actual real world goods and services. And then if you had a platform that has sufficient scale, so for example, like tens of millions of users, you know, maybe tens of billions of dollars in transactions. We're not there yet, but felt like we could build any sort of applications that you build on a blockchain a lot more useful. So that's how we got started in payments. Even if you had like a sort of a pretty high yield, you know, savings account, for instance, right? It just becomes a lot more useful if it just gets hooked up into ubiquitous payments, right? But if you don't have that, then it's kind of like, okay, yeah, I'll use it, but you know, probably won't keep most of my money there, similar to how I use my commercial bank account, right?
Sure. I mean, to your point, I think in general, if crypto is hooked to day-to-day usage, such as payment or whatever else, it'll just make crypto in general more valuable, because it means that crypto will be distributed to more people. Right now, we might be at, I don't know, 10 million people, max 100 million around the world that own any amount of crypto. But assuming these cryptocurrencies are distributed to a larger group of people, then the user base is strong. Like collectively, we are strong. The hands are stronger collectively, right? But I guess I want the audience to learn more about Terra. I mean, this is your opportunity to tell us how the system works, how the product works.
Yeah, so we have a family of stablecoins, you know, each pegged to a different type of fiat currency. So right now we support Korean won, US dollar, Mongolian MNT, IMF SDR, and some others. But the idea is that we would hook it up into a merchant base that is quite actively being used in East and Southeast Asia. And that would help us drive distribution and to get a lot of wallets and usership. So right now we have a couple of payment operations. So we have an e-wallet called Qiao that we built 16, 17 months ago in Korea. So that company is doing about $1.2 billion in annualized transaction volume today, and recently passed 2 million active users. So to put this in rough context, in a country of around 50 million people, it's being used by 4% of the population.
Mm-hmm.
We have a payment gateway called Einport. So this is a sort of a payments aggregator, which was founded in 2011 that we ended up acquiring. So this company serves around 1,600 different merchants and is doing about $3.2 billion in transaction volume. So all in all, in Korea, we are looking to process around, somewhere around $5 billion towards the end of the year. So this puts us roughly in third place in sort of digital payment services after Naver Pay, which is founded by the company's largest search engine, and then Kakao Pay, which is the largest messaging platform.
Yeah, I mean, 4 million users, I feel like you guys might be the #1 non-speculative crypto app in the world. I'm not aware of any other products or services that have 4 million users, right?
Well, it's 2 million and 4% of the population, but it's
right, 2 million users. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like Brave browser also has lots of users. Different type of use case.
The Brave tokens are not necessarily used for non-speculative reasons.
Right. Yeah. That's where we're at. We have a payment service in Mongolia called MiniPay. So that's much smaller and like 40,000 monthly active users, but there's like only 2.8 million people in the country. So that's not shabby. Right.
Normally, based on my interaction with you, you're like a really product oriented and user oriented. But I guess people might also be interested in, the technology that underlies Terra. What is it built on top of?
Yeah, so Terra is a Cosmos SDK chain. So we leverage Tendermint and related technologies. So I guess what would be really interesting is sort of the stability mechanism. So how sort of Terra stablecoins stay stable is that we have essentially a set of fiat pegged indices. So something pegged to the Korean won, US dollar. And then at any given time, the protocol just essentially offers to be the price maker by allowing swaps in Terra stablecoin to Luna at par. So what this means is if you give the system $1 worth of Terra stablecoin, it's always going to give you, it's always going to take that, burn it, and give you $1 worth of Luna in return. And then vice versa, if you give the system $1 worth of Luna, it's going to give you 1 Terra stablecoin. So in a situation where, let's say Terra is trading below the dollar, you can buy up Terra at a discount, sell it to the system, and then get $1 worth, and then sell it in the market for arbitrage, and then vice versa. Mm-hmm. We also started to support, smart contracts on top of Terra. So this is an upgrade that we're really looking forward to, which launches on October 3rd. Mm-hmm. So we're working with Cosmos technology there. So it's a WebAssembly VM based on the Wasmer runtime. Mm-hmm. So that's going to result in, I think, pretty interesting apps beyond just payments.
Mm-hmm. Like what exactly?
Yeah, so actually I've, don't talk about it much, but I've tried my hand at some of the yield farming stuff as well. Yeah. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting is, essentially a lot of the underlying tokens in DeFi essentially have systems where you lock up collateral and then issue some sort of synthetic. Yeah. So the way that I was thinking about it is that these synthetics are usually supposed to be byproducts of leverage. So they're just generally stable coins or, some random price indice. But I started to think about why can't you create indices that are actually pretty useful, right? So why can't you work off with, synthetic indices that connect to, for example, the price of stocks. Yep. So in that case, you'd be able to lock up, let's say, Luna or Ether, and then produce a stock that follows the price of Apple,
Mm-hmm.
or follows the price of Apple, and then you get some yield on top of that.
Yep.
And then if you take that, put it into a pool, and then you create, let's say, something that follows the price of Google, for instance. So
Yeah.
uh,
I mean,
the,
I think that's one of the things that Synthetics is actually working on. Last time I checked, they have like synthetic silver, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, if you can do silver, you can do anything else as long as you have a trusted oracle. But I agree with you. Like this is like some kind of a derivative off of high quality assets such as U.S. stocks, the tech stocks, where anybody in the world can access to. And store their value, store their wealth in is one of the most interesting applications.
Yeah, I think for synthetics though, it's a really interesting application, but I really think they should have the ability to put post collateral in stablecoin. But I guess one of the sort of the difficulties of doing that is that it cannibalizes the use case for the SNX token.
Right.
But given that the sort of the indices are super volatile, you don't want volatility from both ends. Right. So you at least should have some sort of stable pair on one side of the equation.
Yeah, exactly. Unless the volatility cancel out each other, like they're correlated in the same way, directionally correlated. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So is that one of the things that you're looking to build as well for on top of Terra?
Yeah. Well, so looking to build it across lots of different things, but basically. If you had an indice that could connect to price signals that people like, and then you added interesting features on top of that, like for example, like a fixed income interest rate. Right?
Yep.
So then those are things that are really, really interesting, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it enables things like, let's say, synthetics that follow the price of stocks, and then if you sort of had a Robinhood-like trading experience that could be distributed to end users in retail, and then you started yield farming based on the synthetics, then that sounds a lot more interesting than tokens that have no pegged value.
Yeah,
if that makes sense. Yeah.
Fair. So last time I chatted with you, you were working on something along the lines of a lending platform. If I understood correctly. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about it? Because that's the kind of product that's more, I guess, more international, like more outside of Korea. So how do you tell us about that?
Yeah. So when Alipay was around like 100 million users, and in China, like 100 million users is like our million users.
Yeah.
They started to run into the problem that people were using Alipay to buy things on Alibaba, but they weren't necessarily keeping money around on the platform. So that was leading to not significant but still working capital issues for the company. So one of the things that they realized is if they found a way to offer users passive income, so really attractive savings on Alipay, then they'll end up keeping a lot more of their money there, and then likely to use that captive capital to do interesting things on the Alipay platform.
Yep.
So one of the really interesting things that Alipay did was that they basically created an MMF product on Alipay.
What's the MMF product?
Money market fund.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it didn't really look like a money market fund. It just looked like like a savings account where people could post money to, and then it should show you the interest.
Yep.
So what they told people was, okay, essentially whatever the commercial bank is offering you, we'll give you 1% more. So that led to white collar workers in China, posting on average like around a third of their paychecks in Alipay, like a few years after that launched. And in 2015, it became the largest money market fund in the world, beating out the likes of Fidelity and JP Morgan. That's been the game for decades, right? So that was super interesting. But anyways, so that led to Alipay being able to cross-sell lots of different interesting features like insurance, card recommendations, and things like that. So today, like payments is no longer the primary revenue source for Alipay. I'm looking at its IPO filing, so that's really interesting. Anyways, so long story short, savings can be a powerful vehicle when it's tied with ubiquitous payments. And we started to look at ways where blockchain can be leveraged to offer users a high and interesting yield. And felt like existing, sort of lending protocols like Compound, and Aave were really, really interesting. But I guess the problem there was that the interest rate was too volatile. If you sort of peel back the onion and then look at how these lending protocols are able to generate yield on stablecoins, it's funded by demand for leverage on Ether and other sort of ERC20 tokens. Yep. So obviously, depending on the market condition, there could be a high demand for such leverage, or there could be nothing. But that's not a great experience for, let's say, just a retail user looking to keep their capital in, because if the interest rate is like 8% in 1 second, and then maybe like 3 hours later it drops down to 0%, then that's just not a risk that they want to bear, right? That's why we started working on this thing called Anchor. So it's a savings product that leverages block rewards from multiple POS blockchains in order to generate a stable-ish attractive yield. So the basic idea is that the protocol looks a lot similar to Compound, except the posted collateral is in the form of staking positions across, let's say, Cosmos, Polkadot, Algorand, Terra, Solana. And the staking rewards that accrue to those positions are then transferred to the lender in the form of yield. So essentially, from the borrower's perspective, I can leverage on my staking position without paying an explicit interest rate, because my interest rate is paid for me by the cash flows that are accruing to my collateral. Whereas in the perspective of a lender, I essentially get to subsume the staking rewards that is going to the borrower, while at the same time having my principal protected in the form of a stablecoin.
Yep. But so let me summarize. The borrower, in order to borrow, they have to deposit some collateral, and the collateral has to be one of those proof of stake coins.
Yes.
And they don't have to pay any interest, because the interest ultimately comes from the yield off of the staking. And right. That's what the lenders earn. Right. Okay, so that's very interesting. But that means you don't have a lot of room to play around with the interest rate. Like the interest rate is entirely dependent on the staking reward, right?
Sure.
Yeah. It's not, because the staking reward is generally algorithmically determined rather than market driven, right? Like in the case of Compound and Aave, the interest is market driven, right? Driven by the supply demand for margin trading. And then in your case, it's determined algorithmically by the staking reward, right?
Yeah, so you can sort of think about this as Compound plus the rate that is going to the collateral. So usually the staking rate is going to be sufficient to cover any interest rate that the borrower needs to pay. But in situations where there's just way too much borrowing demand so that it cancels out staking, then the interest would rise above that and the borrower will still have to pay a small fee, right? So it's Compound plus staking cash flows.
Like, can you say that again? Can you say the Compound part again?
Yeah, so for Compound, they have some sort of interest rate curve. So if the borrowing demand is high, then the interest rate increases, right? Mm-hmm. So the cost of borrow increases. In Anchor's case, such a curve still does exist. So if there's still too much borrowing demand, like the interest rate is going to rise above the staking rate and the borrower will still need to pay fees. Mm-hmm. But in most cases, the staking reward is going to be sufficient to cancel out that borrowing demand.
Okay, gotcha. So in the extreme case, the borrower still need to pay some interest rate. Got it.
Right.
Okay.
As for like expected interest rates, like one way to think about it is, the averaged out staking rewards across all the different, POS blockchains times, let's say the collateral ratio of the system minus some sort of system hedge risk, like slashing risk and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So interesting. Um, I want to ask a question about general like building a business, because the theme of this webcast is generally geared towards entrepreneurs and founders, and you're one of the very few founders whose product is being used by millions of non-speculative users, right? So I guess I want the audience to learn from you in terms of like how you think about user growth, user acquisition, and retention. Maybe share some of your experience in that area.
Yeah. So one of the things that went really well for us is, a lot of our core assumptions around sort of the payments payment services and value propositions that we're building turned out to be correct. It turns out that merchants like, being settled quickly, paying low transaction fees, and on the consumer side, generally, a lot of people say that payments is crowded, but if you build a pretty good product, people are still going to use it. So I think that was pretty encouraging. On the flip side, I guess where we were sort of mistaken is, we have multiple different user bases at Terra, right? So there's, sort of the native crypto audience, and then there's sort of the payments audience. So for a really long time, we were just very focused on building the Terra blockchain as sort of infrastructure for first-party consumption, so mainly for our own payment purposes. But what that meant was we were slow to build lots of things that would get crypto users excited. So from that perspective, I think that's definitely something that we can focus on more. But what I would say though is generally it makes a lot of sense to build for markets that are growing really, really quickly. So if the macro tide is with you, then in that case, it helps you acquire users faster. Your sort of usership is not going to be bounded by the size of the market and things like that. And you can definitely say that for like e-commerce in Asia, payments, I think synthetics market is going to grow. Savings market is going to keep growing. So.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously you need to build the right product for the right market, but let's say like for something like payment system, right? Payment network, it doesn't, like it needs a critical mass at the beginning, right?
Sure.
There's network effect. There's absolutely network effect around it. So how do you go about bootstrapping the initial critical mass?
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways to do this. So when we started, we sort of went for the largest merchants first. So the idea was that, we would build a product that is hooked up to, very well-known brands, and that we would spend significant amounts of time trying to make these people happy, and then move on to the long tail later. And I think this made sense for us because we had sort of, personal networks or, e-commerce at sort of the larger tiers was an industry that we understood really well through Daniel. But I think if I didn't really have that, I would have tried to build something that's for the long tail first. So for the long tail, there are actually, in Asia, it's actually pretty hard to find, payment services that people can hook up to right away. So you actually need to either, speak to a sales representative of a, payment service. There is no like Stripe-like SDK kind of service until very recently. So in that case, given, this sort of culture of targeting, of having to speak with salespeople and having to negotiate fees all the time is sort of a subpar experience for the developer. So a lot of developers don't, like meeting salespeople, right? So in that case, I would focus on a long tail strategy with, very developer friendly SDKs and try to build up from there.
But at the beginning, you have no consumers, right? And then so you go out to the merchants and you tell them, yeah, install this thing that we just built. But then how do you convince them to do that? What is their incentive when there's no consumers?
Yeah, so I guess on sort of when we were acquiring our first merchants, what was really helpful is that we were able to offer commercial terms that no other payment companies were willing to offer.
Mm-hmm.
So in payments, what's kind of interesting is that you have these things called value add networks. So, and the biggest irony in the space is that value add networks actually offer no value. So what they do is essentially they were, you know, they're an anachronism. So born out of a time where for payment services to settle to the merchants, you know, there need to be somebody like physically at like a bank teller or getting on the phone with a lot of different people to send out wires to different merchants. So basically what a value add network does is that every day it essentially takes like an Excel sheet from the payment service and then a large bulk payment. And then it sends out wires to all the merchants that need to be settled that day, which is super easy. Like, you know, like anybody can do this. But they were born out of a time where, you know, doing digital bulk payments like that were very difficult. And one of those things that, you know, that hasn't really been done away with yet for lots of legacy reasons in the industry. But that's kind of funny, right? Like the one thing that is called the value add network in the payment stack actually offers absolutely no value. That when I first entered the industry, that was like the most hilarious thing to me. But anyways, so the crazy thing about value add networks is that they have like, you know, ex SVPs of banks that are running the business, you know, so it's kind of, they're very hard to do away with. And they generally like to delay settlement periods, right? So, you know, when you go to the VAN, they generally take multiple days in order to settle to the merchant, which is very annoying for merchants that need to have working capital quickly. So for example, if you're a food delivery platform, you need to be able to settle with mom and pop stores and, you know, that little stall with the uncle around the corner, because he needs that money right away to be able to buy ingredients and like pay his one employee and, you know, buy food for his family.
Mm-hmm. So
being settled quickly is something that a lot of merchants really, really wanted, and nobody could do that because everybody was using VANs. Mm. So when we first started, we said, okay, we're not going to use VANs. We're going to settle in stablecoin. And then for the earliest set of merchants, what we're going to do is that we're just going to hustle. And then whenever they want to be settled, we're going to take the stablecoin that the user settles right away. And then we're going to OTC sell it for them and then just give them money right away. So we were able to do this. And, you know, we first started doing things like, you know, the same day settlements or like next day settlements and things like that. And then that ended up being, you know, really, really popular with the initial merchants that even the ones that are very large.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Interesting. One question that a lot of founders ask is, you know, what is your view? What are some of the biggest opportunities you see for entrepreneurs in the DeFi space?
Yeah. So whenever we're in a bull market, I feel like the noise to signal ratio rises a lot. 100%. So I think, yeah, one thing that you can say about bull markets is that there's really, really interesting things that are being built out. And, you know, watching the space, I think some of the experiments are actually really, really eye-opening for me. So for example, SushiSwap was super fascinating because it sort of proved that so I guess what was going through the Uniswap team's head was that, okay, we're going to build this great product, become the greatest AMM DEX in the market, and then we're just going to, you know, do like a token sale at like $1 billion plus, yeah. Right? But I think one of the things that are starting to be proven out now, and I'm sure that everything under the sun is going to get forked. I'm sure MakerDAO is going to get forked. I'm sure Synthetics is going to get forked. I recently saw this community that, you know, I'm not sure if it's a fork, but it's like starting out, you know, do you remember Basecoin, like Basis Cash?
Basis, yeah.
Yeah, and then there's this like degen project looking to bring that, you know, back from the dead called Basis Cash. So,
oh, okay.
Yeah, it's called Basis Cash, but
yeah,
it's really funny. So anything under the sun is going to get forked.
Yeah.
And what's kind of interesting is that it sort of challenges preconceptions of what sorts of projects will be able to extract rent, right? Like, so will you be able to, you know, like raise like a large VC round predicated on the condition that VCs are going to get lots of tokens? things like that are going to probably get a lot more challenging. And it just shows like how much latent demand that the community has for, community governed protocols, and ownership that is a little bit more equitably distributed to people that don't have access to primary rounds and things like that. So that things like that are really interesting. While at the same time, I think this presents an opportunity to create, interesting things, right? Because whereas previously, if you, during the bear market, like if you create something interesting, it takes a long time, to build up a brand, build up a team, raise capital, and things like that. But like in the bull market, like, you could create something, get lots of attention, even end up in like CoinMarketCap top 10 if you get lucky. So really interesting opportunity there.
But you said you're wondering what kind of products can actually extract rent, given the fact that everything is open source, everything is forkable, everything under the sun will be forked. But how do you? So I guess a question that would be really helpful for founders is your advice on how to build a product that has a moat against forking.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess there's like a couple of ways of thinking about this. I think if the token is already pretty equitably distributed, then there isn't a strong argument for forking it, right? So for example, if somebody tried to, fork Ethereum now or like Bitcoin now, like all the Ethereum and like Bitcoin forks are pretty much dead, right? So, except maybe Litecoin for some reason, but
that also means founders dilution right off the bat. Right. I mean, like when you first build a product, you're the least safe against other people forking you. And so you're saying like, well, you can start by distributing the tokens, fairly widely, but then that means a lot of dilution for your own tokens.
Right. So I guess there's multiple different competitive moats. So basically, taking a smaller ownership is definitely one way to build that moat.
Yep.
Because it makes it less attractive for people to fork you.
Yep.
Right. But at the same time, yes, it means that you have less upside, less incentive to grow the network. Because even if it's like $100 billion, if you own like 0.001% of the network, then that's probably not like a crazy amount of money.
Yep.
Another way of thinking about this is, just because we work in blockchain doesn't mean all the components of your stack needs to be entirely decentralized. And sadly, I think one of the things that we're realizing is like, well, not sadly necessarily, but like you need some sort of centralized component to build a competitive moat, right? And so for like Uniswap, for instance, I felt like one of the things that they could have really built a competitive moat around is, a lot of the tooling, for example, like user interfaces for trading, if they built like sophisticated interfaces like that is more akin to like a centralized exchange, and then didn't really open source that material, then it would have been like, it would be one of the competitive moats for SushiSwap to be able to compete with, right? Because if they have like a janky interface, and then like Uniswap comes with bells and whistles and lots of different trading interfaces, and that'd be really hard to compete with. And for us, like we have a centralized payments and a wallet component, so like forking that user base and merchant base is really hard. So
wait, so what part of your system is actually open source?
So the blockchain and sort of the wallet integration pieces are open source, but the mobile app itself is not open source.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you open source everything, like your thing is very defensible. Yeah. Like it's very hard to bootstrap a new payment system from the ground up. It's a lot of business development work in order to do that.
Yeah. So I mean, I think it depends, but there are some things that are a little bit more defensible. So if you have business related defensibilities, like for example, like building up a merchant base or building up sort of a non-crypto user base and things like that, then I think it's a little bit more defensible. But for wouldn't it be hilarious if somebody forked MakerDAO and then gave away NKR tokens for free? And then like there was this token called, I don't know, like DAI2 or something like that. And then that was on Binance and the Coinbase, and you know, that'd be pretty funny. But so basically I think the moral of the story is I think there are lots of different protocols that are live in the wild right now that could easily get forked, have fair launches and distribution, and sort of essentially that could sort of swamp the use cases of the sort of the original communities or tokens.
Yeah, I guess the takeaway here is, you know, there are several ways to build a moat around it, right? One is not necessarily fair distribution, but like wide distribution. Another way is, you know, by design, your product is just more defensible. But if in the case that your product is not that defensible, such as in the case of some AMM, right, spot exchange AMM, then you probably want to think about the former, which is a wide distribution of tokens right off the bat. I feel like the apps that are built on top of blockchains in general are a lot easier to fork than the underlying blockchains. Like then you know, like forking a dApp is a lot easier than like forking Bitcoin, for instance. Because like in order to fork, like forking it, when you fork a dApp, the consensus layer is already done for you. You don't need to worry about that. But when you fork a Bitcoin, you have to get a bunch of miners aligned with you, right? And then you need to get the entire world aligned with you. Like the consensus layer is a lot of hard work to get that, actually get that forked. So,
yeah. Come to think about it, I guess MakerDAO is pretty defensible there too. I'm sure they have like a large ecosystem of like trading firms participating in liquidations.
Yeah.
Like a ton of tooling.
No, I think MakerDAO is very defensible.
Yeah.
I mean, the liquidity and the market makers to get the DAI pegged to $1, it's not easy to get off the ground.
Yeah. Maybe Uniswap was too simple. Maybe that was the problem.
Yeah, I mean, Uniswap is I mean, it's very simple from a user point of view, right? I mean, that's one of the reasons why Uniswap took off in the first place. But the simplicity might be the reason why it's less defensible. But we'll see. I mean, they're going to launch V3, and they're yet to issue a token. So I think they're going to make a comeback. We'll see. I mean, this space is super interesting, right? Like the forkability of things is going to be one of the most interesting things to pay attention to. Tell us about I guess a struggle that you went through during your adventure.
You know, I guess there's been a few, but one of the things that was kind of really interesting to me was when we were trying to procure sort of licensing for payments. And initially we called our payment services, you know, Terra X or Terra Pay. And then we used the same logo as the coin. And for the longest time, like we kept trying to get a meeting with the FSS. So that's the country's financial regulator. And we kept not getting the meeting. And then through some other route, like we actually ended up meeting the person, and then they said, oh, it's like, we can't give you the license because like you're a crypto company. Right. And there's no reason why, like he is compelled to give us a license if we meet all the regulations. But apparently, you know, one of the ways that they can defer on not giving the license is by refusing official meetings. And given that there wasn't any regulation in crypto at the time, there was just implicit pressure from sort of a higher ranks at the FSS to bypass not getting the license by not talking to crypto companies. So yeah, so that was really interesting because I sort of assumed that regulators were sort of bureaucrats. So if you tick off all the boxes and do all the things, and they'll just do it to you. But it was kind of fascinating to see, you know, political dynamics at work where even if there was no legislation saying X, Y, Z, you know, sentiments among the upper. It was kind of fascinating to learn that bureaucrats needed to be worked with, right? Because like I just imagine that everybody, all the regulators are sort of like people at the DMV, right? So like dead-eyed, you just fill out paperwork, and you know they just want to be done with you. So they'll just give you as long as you do what's asked of you.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was kind of fascinating. Like we had to, you know, do sales and then work with the regulator there, and then we ended up finally rebranding to something that wasn't Terra related. That's called Chai, which I think,
Yep.
I guess, like when we first launched the service, it caused a lot of confusion among like our token holder base.
I'm still confused. But
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
it's something. It sounds like it's something you had to do in order to
yeah,
overcome the regulatory hurdle.
yeah, yeah. Which is kind of hilarious, right? Because like when we send out press releases, we say, "Oh, Terra's payment service Chai reached like 1 million users" or something like that. But
Yeah.
it's yeah, very funny.
Uh,
Yeah. But that took a long time, like almost a year.
Jesus. I mean, what did you do during the meantime? Just product development, while hoping that the license will get done.
Yeah, I mean, we kicked off that process like when we first started the company. So it worked out nicely because we had to build up, you know, lots of parts of the stack anyway. Like for example,
Yeah.
you know, the blockchain part, you know, the payments wallet parts, banking integrations, and things like that. So
Got it.
it ended up working out. But
One final question, a piece of advice for founders in the DeFi space.
yeah, I guess like the first piece of advice is just do it, because it's gonna be fascinating, and no matter what, I'm actually quite optimistic and bullish about the speculation that's going on, because I think no matter what, at the end of the day, these are going to be interesting things to be able to build, and I think DeFi, some factor of it is going to be one of the most interesting things to come out of crypto. So if you're sort of sitting on the fence and thinking about whether to do it, you know, do it, even if you're just going to do like a fast food fork. I think it's just like a really good idea to try to get that experience. But yeah, as you're doing that, like if you have temptation from between like you know, doing the fast food fork and you have a genuinely good idea that you think is going to be more interesting in the long term, try to do the second, because you know, there's no such thing as 10,000% APR. So that's going to change at some point. So yeah, I think like
Awesome.
like yeah, maybe like 50% APR, like that's yeah, that might be like information asymmetry, but like 10,000%, that's insane.
Yeah, I mean, the 50% APR basically comes from information asymmetry between the insiders. I mean, by insiders, I mean like people generally who've been in this space for a while, and the newcomers. So the only way for the APY or the APR to sustain itself at 50+% is if there's more money coming into this place, more new players, and those are the people who's gonna subsidize the yield for the old players, for better or for worse. But I totally agree with you. If you have an idea, just do it now. Especially in the bull market, it's just so easy to raise money right now. You can't. I mean, it's just there's so much money in crypto, and in fact, not that many great ideas or not that many founders building yet. So there's again a lot of asymmetry between funding and entrepreneurship right now. So totally agree with you on that. This was super fun. Thank you, Do. I know it's still very early on your side, right? Like 7 a.m. or something, but really appreciate you coming and coming to the show and tell us about your adventure. And thanks again thanks again the audience for this great meeting here. Cool.
Yeah, sounds great. All right, thanks so much, Qiao.
All right, take care.
Bye.